My father's funeral was supposed to be the last quiet moment our family ever shared. But as the rain fell, tapping like whispers on black umbrellas, my mother's voice cut through the air with a tremor that didn't sound like grief. It sounded like revelation. "This is Daniel," she said, her hand resting on the shoulder of a stranger standing beside her. "Your father's other son." The world tilted. Conversations froze. Even the pastor stopped breathing for a second. I stared at the man. My supposed brother. Holding my father's watch. My watch now. The one he'd promised me when I was 10. Then my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. I recognized the seal. My father's estate. My inheritance. And without hesitation, she handed it to him. Something inside me cracked. I wanted to shout, to demand the truth. But the silence in that chapel felt heavier than any scream could be. The coffin sat between us, as if my father's ghost was watching the pieces of his secret life collide. Why did she wait until now? Was I mourning a man who never truly loved me? Or was I about to uncover a betrayal that started long before I was born? The service ended, but no one moved. The air inside that church felt too thick to breathe. My mother stood near the coffin, her hand still resting on Daniel's shoulder, as if anchoring herself to a truth she'd carried for years. I wanted to ask her why. Why now? Why him? Why like this? But my throat burned with questions that refused to form. People pretended not to stare, but I could feel every gaze piercing into me, measuring my reaction. When Daniel finally met my eyes, it wasn't arrogance I saw. It was something closer to pity that made it worse. The pastor mumbled something about closure, but I couldn't even stand still long enough to listen. I turned toward the rain-soaked doors, my father's name echoing in my mind like a broken bell. Closure? How could there be closure when the coffin wasn't the only thing buried here? Outside, the rain hit like punishment. I stood under the awning, watching water trail down the steps, blending with the mud that stained the cemetery path. The sound of shovels echoed faintly in the distance where the grave awaited. My mother and Daniel walked out together, sharing the same black umbrella. A sight that twisted my stomach. I thought of every night my father had tucked me in, every story he told me about family and honor. Now, I couldn't tell which parts were lies and which were just half-truths meant to comfort a child. When Daniel stopped near me, he spoke softly, almost apologetic. "I didn't ask for this," he said. I didn't respond, because deep down neither did I. Back at the reception hall, the smell of coffee and flowers mixed into something suffocating. My relatives avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy with pastries and folded napkins. My mother sat in the center of it all, calm now, almost relieved, as if releasing the secret had lightened her soul. I watched Daniel stand beside her, speaking quietly with the lawyer who once handled my father's estate. The same man who'd promised me everything would be fair. My pulse quickened. Every word they exchanged felt like a piece of my father's legacy slipping away. When Daniel laughed softly at something my mother said, I felt a strange heat rise behind my eyes. Not just anger, loss, the kind that doesn't scream, it just burns slowly. I finally cornered her near the window, where the rain had softened into a quiet drizzle. "You couldn't have told me," I said, my voice low but trembling. She looked at me, not with guilt, but with something close to exhaustion. "Your father made promises he couldn't keep," she murmured. "I'm just finishing what he started." I wanted to shout that this wasn't hers to finish. It was mine, my inheritance, my closure, my father. But before I could speak again, Daniel approached. He looked between us, cautious, unsure of where to stand. And for the first time, I saw something human in him. Confusion, maybe even fear. It didn't matter. The line had already been drawn. My family had rewritten its story without asking if I wanted to be in it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain had faded, but the echo of my mother's words wouldn't leave. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folded suit I hadn't bothered to hang up, still smelling faintly of lilies and regret. I kept replaying the image of that folder. The one with my father's seal, now in Daniel's hands. What did it mean? Why would she give it to him, not me? When I finally opened my father's desk drawer, searching for answers, I found something I wasn't supposed to. An old photograph. My father, my mother, and Daniel. Younger, smiling, together. My heart dropped. He'd known him all along. This wasn't a secret revealed by death. It was a lie sustained by light. Morning arrived too bright for the kind of grief I carried. I drove to my father's office downtown, needing to see for myself what he left behind. The place was untouched. Dust on the windows, framed awards, crooked on the wall. The faint scent of his cologne still lingering. I ran my fingers across the desk, had spent half his life behind, and found a locked drawer. I remembered how he used to joke that this drawer held his secrets. For years, I thought he meant old cigars or letters from clients. But now, that word, secrets, sounded heavier. I searched his drawers for the key, my pulse racing. And when I finally found it taped beneath a drawer handle, I knew whatever waited inside would change everything. The drawer creaked open like a confession. Inside were documents, letters, bank records, and an envelope marked for my sons. My hands trembled as I opened it. My father's handwriting, uneven and desperate, filled the page. He admitted everything. Daniel was born before he married my mother. He'd supported him quietly all these years, afraid the truth would destroy the family he built later. He wrote about guilt, how it followed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. But what caught my breath was the final line. Everything I earned belongs to both of you. Don't let my mistakes divide you. I stared at those words until they blurred. My father's legacy wasn't just money. It was a wound he'd hoped love could heal. But love never got the chance. I drove straight to my mother's house, the letter folded in my pocket like a loaded weapon. She opened the door, eyes weary, as if she'd been expecting me. I placed the letter on the kitchen table between us. You knew, I said quietly. She didn't deny it. Instead, she nodded, slowly, painfully. He wanted to tell you, she whispered, but he was afraid you'd hate him. Her voice broke, and for the first time that day, I saw the cost of her silence. She hadn't done this to hurt me. She'd done it because she thought truth would destroy what little we had left. But by waiting, she'd let the truth rot. Later that evening, I found Daniel waiting by my car. He looked uncertain, his expression stripped of arrogance. I didn't know about the inheritance, he said. She handed me the papers. But I didn't ask for them. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I even did. But forgiveness isn't simple. Not when it's tangled in blood and betrayal. Still, when he offered the folder back, I hesitated. For the first time, I saw not an intruder, but someone who'd grown up with the same empty ache. A man who also wanted to know his father. Maybe we weren't enemies after all. Just two broken halves of the same story. The next morning, I met Daniel at my father's lawyer's office. The air smelled of paper, coffee, and something unspoken. We sat across from each other, the folder between us like a live wire neither wanted to touch first. The lawyer, an older man with careful eyes, cleared his throat and opened the final page of the will. "There's one more document," he said, sliding an envelope forward. "Your father added this 6 months before he passed." My pulse quickened. Daniel leaned in, brow furrowed. Inside was a letter written not to either of us, but to both. It spoke of a small property outside the city, a workshop, and a request. You will inherit it only together. The truth of who I was lives there. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in Daniel's eyes that mirrored my own. Fear. Maybe curiosity. Our father's last wish wasn't about dividing us. It was about forcing us to meet the truth face to face. The drive to the property felt longer than it should have. The city faded behind us, replaced by winding roads and overgrown fields. Neither of us spoke much. The silence between us thick but not hostile, more like two people standing on the edge of something they didn't yet understand. When we finally reached the gate, it creaked open with a metallic groan. The workshop sat behind it, small, weathered, almost swallowed by trees. My father's name was still faintly visible on the rusted sign above the door. Daniel looked at me, waiting for a cue. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Dust rushed out like memory itself. Inside, the air smelled like oil and sawdust. The place was cluttered with old tools, notebooks, and photographs pinned to the walls. My father had spent countless nights here, and suddenly I understood why. It wasn't just a workshop. It was a shrine to everything he couldn't say out loud. We found blueprints, sketches, and letters, all pieces of a life split between two families. There were birthday cards addressed to Daniel, drafts of letters he never sent, and small wooden carvings marked with initials. D and M, our names. My throat tightened. He hadn't chosen one of us over the other. He'd carried both of us quietly, until the weight crushed him. Daniel sat on a stool, holding one of the carvings in his hand. "He must have made these years ago," he said softly. I nodded, running my fingers across the other. For the first time, I didn't see him as a stranger. I saw a reflection. Someone who'd been living with his own version of silence. Our father hadn't been perfect. He'd been a man trying to mend a broken map, one where love crossed the wrong lines. And though his lies had divided us, his final act was clear. He wanted us to finish what he couldn't, to face each other, not as rivals, but as remnants of the same man's heart. As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, Daniel and I stepped outside, the workshop door creaking shut behind us. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something like peace. My father's secrets hadn't destroyed us. They'd revealed who we truly were. Two men bound not by inheritance or bloodlines, but by the same longing to understand the man who shaped us. Daniel glanced at me and said quietly, "Maybe this is what he wanted. Not forgiveness, but connection." I nodded. The storm had passed. And though the ground beneath us was still muddy from all that had fallen, it finally felt steady enough to stand on. We almost left that evening, but something about the silence inside the workshop felt incomplete. I turned back, drawn to the old desk in the corner. It was heavy, carved from oak, its surface stained by time and oil. I pulled open the top drawers. Just scraps, receipts, tools. But then Daniel noticed a faint line along the base. A hidden seam. He crouched down, tapping it lightly. Hollow. When we pried the panel loose, a small wooden box slid out, wrapped in brittle newspaper. Inside was a stack of letters bound with a blue ribbon and one faded photo. My father standing with two women. My mother and someone else. Daniel's mother. They weren't enemies in the picture. They were smiling, side by side. The truth wasn't what I'd imagined. It wasn't betrayal. It was love, complicated and human, that had tried to survive in two places at once. We opened the letters carefully. Each one carried years of silence folded between the lines. They were written to both women, alternating between love and guilt, as if our father had tried to confess in ink what he couldn't speak aloud. Some letters were never sent. Others were marked with dates close to his heart attacks, his handwriting shaking with regret. Daniel read quietly beside me, his eyes wet but steady. Every sentence hurt, not because of what our father had done, but because of how much he'd loved and still managed to ruin everything anyway. I realized then that grief isn't just about losing someone. It's about finding pieces of them in the ruins and realizing you never truly knew them at all. Tucked beneath the final letter was a smaller envelope, sealed and addressed simply. To the one who forgives. Daniel and I exchanged a glance before I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a small key. The note read, "The last of me is not in money or memory, but in what I built with my hands. Find the safe beneath the floor. What's inside belongs to both of you. If you can forgive me enough to open it together." For a long moment, we didn't move. Forgiveness. It sounded simple, but standing there surrounded by dust and ghosts, I wasn't sure I knew how to give it. Still, Daniel reached out first. "Let's finish this," he said. And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. We found the safe hidden under a loose wooden plank. Dust rose as we lifted it, revealing a small metal box embedded in the floor. The key fit perfectly. My hands shook as I turned it. The lock clicked, echoing through the silent room. Inside lay a single velvet pouch and another note. I opened it slowly. A pair of identical silver rings rested inside, engraved with the same words. 2 sons, 1 legacy. I looked up at Daniel, and for once, I didn't feel anger or jealousy, just the strange calm that comes when truth stops hiding. We were both part of a story too heavy for one person to carry, and maybe that was what our father had always known, that some burdens were meant to be shared. We stepped outside into the cold night, the rings still warm from our hands. The workshop stood silent behind us, but it no longer felt haunted. It felt whole. I turned the ring over in my palm, tracing the engraving until it blurred. "Do you think he ever forgave himself?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked at the horizon where the first stars began to appear. Maybe this was his way of asking us to. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of oil and rain. I slipped the ring onto my finger, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like something was missing. My father hadn't left us broken. He'd left us unfinished, and we had finally found the ending he never could. By the time we returned to the city, dawn had already broken. The roads were quiet, washed clean by the night's rain. Daniel drove while I watched the world pass by in silence. Houses, trees, the ghosts of yesterday. I didn't know what I'd say to my mother when we saw her again. The anger I carried at the funeral had faded, replaced by something heavier. Understanding, maybe. Or the ache that comes when you finally see the truth from someone else's eyes. When we pulled into her driveway, the porch light was already on. She was waiting, standing there in her robe, like she hadn't slept either. For the first time in years, she didn't look like the mother who kept the family together. She looked like someone who'd been holding her breath for decades. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same one where I had once confronted her with anger. But this time, I placed the 2 rings between us. She looked at them for a long moment before her lips began to tremble. "He finally told you," she whispered. I nodded. "Not everything," I said. "But enough." She closed her eyes, exhaling a breath that sounded like release. "I gave Daniel the papers because your father asked me to," she said quietly. "Not to take from you. To protect you. He wanted you to have time to grieve before you carried his mistakes." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't tell you then. I thought if I did, you'd hate him, and maybe me." The truth landed softly, but it hit deep. It wasn't betrayal that had driven her. It was mercy, wrapped in silence. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle. "He wanted us to work it out ourselves," he said. My mother nodded, a faint, broken smile on her lips. "He believed pain could build bridges," she murmured. "I didn't. I thought it would destroy you both." The kitchen fell quiet, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. The same one that had marked every silent dinner we'd had after my father died. I looked at her and saw not deception, but a woman who had loved deeply and failed quietly, trying to hold together a family stitched from truth and lies. And suddenly, I didn't want to punish her anymore. I just wanted to understand her. She took the letter we'd found in the workshop and read it silently, her hands trembling. When she finished, tears ran freely down her cheeks. "He made those rings the year before he died," she said. "He told me they were for when the truth finally came home." I swallowed hard. The anger that once lived inside me had nowhere left to go. It just dissolved. I realized that maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave once. It was something you kept choosing every day when the weight of the past tried to pull you back. Daniel stood, placing one ring in her hand. "He wanted you to have this too," he said softly, and for the first time she didn't refuse. She closed her hand around it, her tears falling onto the silver like rain returning to the earth. When we left her house that morning, the world felt strangely quiet, not empty, but peaceful. Daniel walked beside me, the weight between us finally gone. The rain had stopped for good this time, and the sky was wide and clear. I thought about my father, not as the man who lied, but as the one who tried to love in the only way he knew how. Some stories don't end with justice or revenge. Some end with understanding. The kind that doesn't erase the pain but makes it worth surviving. As we reached our cars, Daniel looked at me and said, "He gave us back to each other." I nodded. Maybe that was the real inheritance all along. Not the papers, not the money, but the chance to finally call each other brothers. A week later, Daniel and I returned to the workshop. It felt different now. Not haunted, just quiet. The dust had settled, and the light through the windows felt softer, like it was finally allowed in. We didn't come back for answers. We came to decide what to do next. As we walked through the space, I noticed a corner I'd ignored before. An old cabinet covered by a faded tarp. Daniel helped me pull it aside, revealing a set of unfinished carvings stacked neatly inside. Tiny wooden figures, children, families, holding hands, standing close. None were complete. Some were missing faces. I realized he'd been trying to build us all along, shaping us from pieces he never finished. Maybe he thought one day we would. We laid the carvings across the workbench, each one rough and fragile. There was something sacred about them, not because of their craftsmanship, but because of the intention behind them. Daniel traced one with his finger. "He tried to make sense of us," he said softly. I nodded. Maybe he couldn't finish them because he didn't know how it ended. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe it ends with us." That moment, surrounded by the scent of cedar and memory, I understood what legacy really meant. It wasn't about inheritance or bloodlines. It was about carrying unfinished love forward and shaping it into something whole. We decided to restore the workshop, not to erase his mistakes, but to preserve them. Every nail, every scratch, every forgotten tool felt like part of a story we didn't want to lose. We spent days cleaning, repainting, bringing life back into the space he had once filled with so much noise and silence. As we worked, laughter replaced the weight between us. We told stories about him, the good ones, the funny ones, the ones that made him human again. For the first time, the workshop echoed with something my father had never managed to create while he was alive. Peace. While sweeping behind the shelves, Daniel found something else. A small tin box, rusted shut. Inside were Polaroid photos, brittle from age. Our father, younger, standing beside both our mothers at the workshop, holding a newborn in each arm. Us. The image didn't look like guilt. It looked like love. Chaotic. Imperfect. Real. It wasn't two families. It was one. Split by time and fear. I felt something shift inside me. The man I'd spent my life resenting had always wanted us together. He just didn't know how to live that truth. We both stood there for a while, staring at that photo, silent but at peace. Maybe this was what forgiveness looked like. Not forgetting the lie, but understanding the heart behind it. That night, as we locked the workshop door for the last time, I looked back, one more time. The carvings sat neatly on the shelves, the photo framed above the workbench. It didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like a promise. We didn't inherit a fortune. We inherited a chance to be better men than the one who raised us, to live without hiding the truth, to build something honest from the ruins he left behind. As the lights went out, I whispered to the empty room, "We finished it, Dad." Daniel turned the key in the lock, and together, we walked away. Two sons carrying one story finally made whole. Weeks passed. Life slowly returned to something that resembled normal, though nothing truly was. Daniel and I started meeting every Sunday, not out of duty, but choice. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence. Other times we'd talk for hours about everything we'd missed growing up apart. It felt strange at first, building a bond from the ruins of someone else's mistakes, but every conversation stitched another piece of something whole. One Sunday I brought a small wooden carving, one of the unfinished ones from the workshop. We decided to finish it together, sanding, shaping, laughing when the edges didn't fit. It wasn't perfect, but neither were we. And maybe that was the point. When we finished the carving, I took it to my mother's house. She met me at the door, her smile soft but still tinged with years of ache. I handed it to her, two small figures holding hands. "He started it," I said quietly. "We finished it." She turned it over in her hands, her eyes glistening. "He would have been proud," she whispered. But I shook my head gently. "He doesn't have to be proud," I said. "He just has to rest." For the first time since the funeral, she looked lighter, as if the weight she'd carried alone had finally found a place to rest too. We didn't say much after that. We didn't have to. The silence between us was no longer painful. It was peaceful. A month later, Daniel and I visited our father's grave. The grass had begun to grow again, soft and green over the soil. We didn't bring flowers, just the carving. We placed it on the headstone, right beside the silver ring I wore that first day. I didn't speak to the grave. I didn't need to. The silence carried enough. For once, there were no more questions to ask, no more anger to hold, just a quiet understanding that sometimes love fails and still it remains. Daniel stood beside me, his hand brushing against the top of the stone. And in that small moment, I realized forgiveness isn't a gift for the dead. It's the way the living learn to breathe again. In the months that followed, we reopened the workshop, not as a place of secrets, but as a space for stories. We called it Legacy Woodworks. People brought old, broken things, chairs, boxes, memories, and we restored them together. Each repair felt symbolic, like healing the fractures left behind by silence. Sometimes when I worked late, I'd swear I could hear the faint hum of my father's old radio or the scrape of his tools. It didn't scare me anymore. It felt like company, like he was still there, guiding our hands through the sawdust and light. We weren't rebuilding his past. We were shaping our own future from it. One evening, as the sun sank beyond the tree line, I locked the workshop and looked out across the fading horizon. Daniel stood beside me, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Hey, like what we've done here," he said. I smiled. "Maybe, but this isn't about him anymore." He nodded, understanding. The air smelled like cedar and rain again, the same scent from the day everything began. Only, now, it didn't carry sorrow. It carried peace. As we walked away from the workshop, I realized something simple and true. Families aren't defined by secrets or bloodlines. They're defined by the choice to stay, even after the truth comes out. And for the first time in a long while, I knew we'd finally stayed. And for the first time in a long while,